So I thought I would start with a fun fact I discovered about you, which is that you are known as Richard Louis, but your last real name is Wong. So how did that name change come about?
What happened was because of the immigration rules in the United States, there was a law that was passed that did not allow those of Chinese descent, those from China, to come to America. And it was the only law ever created. It was called the Chinese Exclusion Act. And so what happened was no more Chinese, unless you were wealthy or aristocratic, came to the US. And that was in the 1800s. 1882 was the year the law was passed. So what happened in 1906 is this great earthquake in San Francisco, and it destroyed all of City Hall and its records. Everything burned down. So what the mayor said was, okay, everybody can come down to the new City Hall and claim 6 to 8 children. I can't remember. And so what all the Chinese folks did is, well, they said, since we can't get more people here, we're going to go down and claim 6 to 8 children. And even if we don't have any children. And so they claimed that, and then they sold those names in China. And then people would come over to the US using that name. They'd buy it. And those became paper sons and paper daughters, because only on paper were they the son or daughter of that parent, of that American. So that's my background. My grandparents bought the name Pon Lu, and his real last name was Pon Wong. That's the other side. So his name's not Pon, but his last name was Wong, but he said he was a Louis. So that's why my real last name is Wong. And it's because of immigration and immigration laws that caused my grandparents to come to America illegally. And I always say I have the Wong name.
And your father, as I understand it, was a pastor and also a social worker, and your mom was a school teacher, but also a church choir girl. So I imagine that you must have grown up in a very nurturing and faith-driven environment.
Yeah. My dad being a pastor, yes, and he used to try to force us to go to church and do all these things. And the reputation of pastors' kids is widely known, that we sometimes are not the best kids. My mom was not that way. She said, you go to church if you want, or you don't. I can't force you. Yeah, my mom was a choir girl. She grew up in Los Angeles. She was born in China, came to America when she was 2, and she was able to come to the United States because her great-grandfather was a U.S. citizen. It was different on her side. So she had a U.S. passport because her father was a U.S. citizen, and he was a U.S. citizen because his father was it. So that's how it worked for my mom. My mom used to sing every night, get on the piano, and play church hymns and sing. And music has always been part of what she loved to do. So not only singing, she learned different instruments, the jazz guitar, the violin, the piano, as you just heard. So yeah, she's a very musical person.
Your parents must have really tried to inculcate the spirit of giving back to society and bringing you along to help out with the community. What was that like? Were there any standout moments?
The thing that stand out, I think, Lingya, is that they picked professions that were, I thought, very selfless. Like my mother being a school teacher, she decided very early when she had 4 children that she was going to stay home and take care of us. My father was a youth pastor and he couldn't make enough money, so he became a social worker. And when he became a social worker, that again is not a high-paying job. So there we were, a family of 6, 1 salary, a social worker, and we were so poor we needed food stamps. And we got help with the welfare system, but that didn't change them. They still wanted to do what they did. My dad still was a social worker. My mom was still a school teacher. They weren't going to change their careers. They never, by the way, ever said, you got to be this way. You got to be, the only thing my dad did was said, you got to go to church. That's the only thing he did. But they never said you had to live a certain way or be a certain way. They would show it, I think. They would just in their lives that my mother, when she went back to work, when I was in middle school, she would get offers to become the vice principal or move to a better school and get better pay. But she'd always say no. And she'd say no because she would go, well, no, this school needs more help. I'm going to stay at this school. And as she got seniority, they even asked her and said, hey, Mrs. Louie, hey, Rose, what school you want to go to? So she picked the school with the lowest scores in the city. And that was the school she wanted to retire from. So I think those decisions and the way they carried themselves to this day were the right kind of values, absolutely committed to their kids to make sure that they would be good people, but not in a forceful way, not in a way that said, you got to volunteer here and you got to do that. They never said any of that. Never, never, never.
The theme of selflessness is so present in your life. But I wonder back then when you were a child, was it something you understood? Because I imagine that if I was living on food stamps, I would look at my parents and go, why are you not putting us first? Why are you going to work to give other people food stamps but needing
Yeah.
it yourself?
Yes. No, you can read my mind, Lingya. That's what I thought later in life. At the time, I didn't know. I was just figuring, well, this is what you can do. This is all they can do. And then my mom not taking the promotions, despite us needing the money, it just became more and more evident about her commitment and why she became a teacher. My mom would volunteer a lot, and she still had a job, and she would have to cook for the family and clean. And that's a whole thing that I didn't like, that I realized later. Why does she do it? Why isn't my dad doing it? At a certain point, and my dad was just a little bit helpless because he was the youngest son of 13 children. What that means is that, and there were 4 sons, 9 daughters, and my dad was the little prince. So when my mom married the little prince, because, you know, Asian families are like that, I'm sure she was just like, oh, gee whiz, I've married into the exact same situation I grew up in. Because in her family, my mom was the youngest daughter. I always wondered why she was a night owl. Like, she'd always be up late. She'd be doing all her stuff late. That's when she would get stuff done, if you will. And it was because in college, she would tell me the stories, and I kind of put it together later in my years, is that she would have to cook the meals, then go work at the family store, then go to class, then come back and cook the dinner, then clean up, then work at the family store, then close the family store, do the books. And then finally, what time did she have for herself to study? Late. 10, 11, 12, midnight. But she never complained. So later on, I think maybe 5 years ago, I was like, Mom, you were the youngest daughter, and this is what I think probably what happened. Is that what happened? Oh, I guess so. I was like, oh, I guess so. So I think that she's very aware of it, but she made the best of it. And she was the smartest person in her family, but she decided to become a school teacher. She's an amazing artist. She's a sculptor. I mean, I've seen some of the artwork that she did when in high school. And Lingya, I got to tell you, I wish I got a little bit of artistic capability, because the sculptures that she did were just like, wow, she was in high school and you could sell this professionally. So she's one of those left brain, right brain people. But I think both sides came together along with a good heart. And so it wasn't about maximizing those things that we often associate, which is quite prevalent, as you know, success, career, money, blah, blah, blah. She moved past that. That was not her goal. And she will tell you, I want to say, like, why would you do that, Mom? Well, she would say it's because of her faith in her religion. That would be her answer. But yeah, they were kind of that way as long as I can remember. Well, the one thing they did do is they took me down to the YMCA to volunteer. I didn't have to do it more than maybe a weekend, but I kept on doing it for years and years and years and years and years, and joined a service club. And then we started helping other folks. And then it just kind of was all in the family, I guess.
I understand that you were bullied in school and that led you to learning from a Shaolin temple master. How did that happen?
Well, yeah, I didn't like school, but I was bullied at school as a little kid because I was a small little Asian kid. So I told my dad that I was getting, bullied. I didn't use that word. I didn't know what it was. But he said, you know what, Richard, you can decide to either fight or you can just keep on getting bullied. And so you decide. So I thought about it, went back to him. I said, okay, yeah. So what are the ideas? Well, I know of an actual Shaolin temple monk who just came to the US, who was there for 5 years and trained there. And he can teach you Kung Fu. And I was thinking, okay, I'm an Asian kid being made fun of because I'm an Asian kid, and you're going to teach me Kung Fu? Like, I'm already the Kung Fu kid, and now you're going to teach me Kung Fu? In the end, I mean, I laugh about that because it's almost like insult to injury in a way, but it did help because that was the time. Like, Bruce Lee had just come out in the 70s, and it was lots of films, right? And the 80s too. And so everybody was scared of Bruce Lee. And here I was, a little Asian kid who could do a couple of Kung Fu moves. And they're like, oh, stay away from him. So it did work in the end. But very funny what he thought the solution was.
And after your high school, you didn't go to college, but you started working at Mrs. Fields Cookies, which is an unusual decision to make.
Oh, yeah. You're being kind. You're being very kind. Unusual is an understatement, I think, in a way. I hated school. I almost flunked out of high school, flunked a grade. I got kicked out of one high school, then went to another high school because I missed like 100 days of class. So the second high school is when you had to have 200 units to graduate. And no matter how many extra classes I took, or no matter how much summer school I would do, I would still come up 2.5 units short. And so I was going to flunk, basically. But the principal was very kind and selfless, because my mom came down to meet with him and she didn't tell me. But she met with the principal, and then the principal found me after my parents left the parent meeting. And he says, Richard, I just talked to your mom about half an hour ago, or this morning, whatever it was. Your dad was there too. Your mom was crying. And then I was like, okay, that's the signal. You better get it right now, Richard. Mom's crying. And what he said is, your mom's a teacher, I'm a teacher, and we help each other. And so, Richard, I'm going to think about how to get you to graduate, and I'll come back to you. So he comes back to me a week later. He says, Richard, I'm going to do something that a principal can do. I'm going to assign a special dispensation so you can graduate with 2.5 units short. But you have to take all of these extra classes. You have to take all the summer classes, even after you graduate, to do this. And I did it, because there's no way. I mean, once my mom came down with my dad and my mom was crying, I was like, oh, you better shape up. Do it for her, right? Do it for her. But then I didn't go to college because I didn't enjoy school at the time. And then that's when I worked at Mrs. Fields Cookies for 4.5 years. And I got fired in the 4th year because I got bored. But before that, there were 500 stores in the United States. And of those 400 or 500 stores, I had number 10 in sales. In the time I had it, I got it to number 1.
Your time at Mrs. Fields, you have described it as one of your galvanizing epiphanies. Why was that?
It was really sort of weird. Like, who doesn't go to college and who works at Mrs. Fields Cookies and thinks that it's what they absolutely wanted to do? That's the stereotype, right? That's the running hypothesis. For me, it was exactly what I wanted to do. It was where I learned amazing things about management, because I had 3 stores. I had 35 employees. I had to teach new store managers, and I was 18 turning 19. And I really enjoyed it. I loved the cookies too. We were bakers in my family. We all loved to bake. So it was everything I could imagine. And the lessons of management really stuck in me from that. And it's interesting. We had something at Mrs. Fields Cookies called Cookie College. And you would fly out to Utah, and in the state of Utah, you would have a bunch of managers getting trained. And so all of that was super helpful for my understanding later on in life about managing people and dividing and conquering, right, as a team.
And wasn't this around the time that you were also quite active politically, and you were campaign manager for Alan Wong? So what spurred you to do that? Because then you decided to go back to college.
Yes, that's absolutely right. So my uncle, family friend, you know how in Malaysia and in Asia, people are your uncles. But he was a close friend of my parents, but also a politician. And so he invited me to come on as a campaign manager. And here I am, I don't know, 19, 20, 21, whatever it was. I write it in the book because I wrote everything down, because you had to go back and actually put down the dates. But I had never done anything like that. I really enjoyed the political process, and I had no idea what I was doing. This is his 3rd election, and he loses, and I'm his campaign manager. But that lesson was super strong. I consider Uncle Alan Wong, he opened my brain up to politics and how you need to lean in. That politics is, by its design, hopefully, to be selfless, because we're contributing to our society, right? We're giving to create better systems of distribution of scarce resources and equity. Fast forward 30 years, and he is now stuck in a wheelchair because he was paralyzed from the neck down because of an accident that he fell. And I'm getting an award from an organization he used to lead in San Francisco. And he goes through the effort of getting into a van and coming to present the award to me. And I was just like, oh, gee whiz, this guy's amazing. He's been living in a wheelchair for 10 years. I still talk to him when I see him. I say, Uncle Alan, the reason why I report on politics is because of you. We would laugh and blah, 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 blah. But when he was up there on the stage and he read the speech, and he's in a wheelchair and he can't move his head, and he gave the speech, you can just imagine, whew, man, it was hard to keep the tears away. Not that you want to or need to, but it was just like, wow. He passed away when I was writing the book. And so in the chapter about career payoff and mentorship, I talk about him. And the reason being is it was really special because that same organization that he led for so many years then wanted to give him a Lifetime Achievement Award posthumously and asked me to be part of it, to give it to him, to give it to his son, actually. His son and myself are very close friends. It's just very special that relationship from way back when, right, in City College, when I went back to community college, and him showing me what giving of yourself might be, had given back to me so many ways and so many times along my journey so far. The college part was I realized I could not be a cookie maker for the rest of my life. Interests change, and we re-identify what we are and who we are many times in our life. And the question is, do we act on it, and do we put a plan together to realize that potential satisfaction? And that was the point where I was like, I can't do cookies anymore. I've loved it for the last 4 years, 3 years maybe, but now it's time to move on. And then I applied to City College of San Francisco, and it's a community college, go Rams. And that did lead into me volunteering for my uncle because he was also on the board. That's what he was running for, the college board. And I said, oh yeah, community college is important. It is great because, I'm benefiting from it. It's affordable. It's only like, I think I was paying $200 per semester or something. I can't remember what I was paying, almost nothing. And so community colleges, accessible education is so important. And had there been a community college in Chinatown when my aunties grew up on my dad's side, it would have been a wholly different life for them. None of the I was talking about the 9 daughters and 4 sons that my dad comes from. None of the daughters got any college education, 0. But they just opened a community college location in Chinatown because I was touring it because I think I had just done the commencement speech for City College. And I got to tell Ling Yao when I went back many years later to give the commencement speech, that was really, really special for me. I know the importance of these 2-year institutions. They're so important to the education of most Americans and most individuals globally, I'd say. The 4-year institutions and the equivalent around the world are very important, but it's also the junior colleges, as they call sometimes. They're super important for that group that is trying to get back into education, like myself. But yeah, so I was wondering what it would have been like if my aunties, my dad's sisters, if they could get that education. They never got it.
But you got that education at a community college, and then you decided to go to Berkeley. But I don't think it was a smooth process, was it?
No, ma'am. I applied to 2 schools. Berkeley was one of them. They rejected me. I got the little skinny letter, and I was upset because I said the master plan of education in California, basically the government, they lay out a plan about how they're going to educate their residents, was created for people like me, older, working out of high school, poor, and went to community college. So I wrote him another letter because my essays for the application were horrible. When I read them later, my essays were horrible for the original application. But the letter was spot on. And I got the fat envelope about a week later. And that's when I went to Berkeley. And Berkeley was also another one of those situations where I was like, wow, what a great educational experience that would change my view on the world and what I could do. City College was great. Berkeley was great. And then later I went to Michigan for an MBA. Michigan was great. So go Rams, go Bears, go Blue.